Yes, so my name is Pam O'Tall. I'm the Outreach and Volunteer Coordinator with DIA, and I'm a second-generation Punjabi American, Houstonian, born and bred. And yeah, I joined DIA in March, so I've been there for about 9 months. And yeah, I really enjoy getting to go out into the community, connecting with South Asians here in Houston, and spreading awareness about domestic violence.
Very nice. And Sandhya?
Yes, my name's Sandhya Samnani, and I'm the Houston board member. I've been a board member for a year, and I've been involved with DEA since 2017.
Okay.
And my background is in education. I'm a former middle school teacher.
Oh, awesome.
Also, some people might know the group that I founded was Houston Desi Moms, so try to stay connected with the South Asian moms here in Houston.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. Can you explain generational trauma? Like, what are some examples of traumas that families may have gone through?
Right, so generational transmission of trauma is the ongoing impact of traumatic events and situations that happened in prior generations and continues to impact the current generation. So essentially, it's trauma that isn't just experienced by one person, but extends from one generation to the next. Okay. And we often see this in domestic and sexual violence, and that can result in generational trauma. So for instance, witnessing a domestic violence incident between parents is often a traumatic experience, which is then sometimes repeated generation after generation. And it becomes this distressing experience that is somehow accepted by the family because the family becomes desensitized and hopeless and powerless about the recurrence, and thus inadvertently enables that cycle to sort of continue and that trauma to carry on into the next generation.
Okay.
And so some signs or symptoms that you may notice, like kind of within yourself, that you may be experiencing generational trauma include maybe being hypervigilant, feeling a sense that you have a shortened future, you are distrustful, you have high anxiety or depression, and you might even have panic attacks.
Okay.
And so I think therapy and just mental health supports can really help break this cycle of generational trauma whenever you take the time to really explore what are the base issues and underlying issues of why this trauma is occurring, how you can handle this.
Okay.
And then also on top of that, I think parents and older generations really have a responsibility how they talk to younger generations and their children about specific issues or events that might have happened, really have that central role in determining whether or not that trauma continues.
Okay. So DIA does have helplines for that, like they can reach out.
Right, for sure. So we do have our confidential helpline, and so if you do feel like you're experiencing generational trauma, you can contact us, and we offer mental health support.
Okay.
So that's like long-term counseling, one-on-one, or even group therapy might also be beneficial.
Okay, awesome. Can you define a trigger, and what are some examples and what are some symptoms to look out for that indicating you are experiencing a trigger?
Right, so a trigger affects your ability to remain present and in the moment and refers to something that affects your emotional state, often like significantly by causing extreme overwhelm or distress. And triggers bring back strong memories, and survivors of abuse may feel like they're living through it all over again, sort of like reliving their memory all over again.
Okay.
And so triggers remind you of that traumatic event, and these can be internal or external triggers, like specific phrases, odors, like if you smell a candle, sounds, like a firework can remind you of a gunshot, or even reading or hearing about traumatic events that were similar, like on the news. Those can all be very triggering. And sometimes like triggers can be obvious, but other times you don't realize that you're triggered. You just feel those symptoms of anxiety, like you have trouble breathing, and just like that sort of physical reaction.
Yeah.
So really just kind of taking the time to note your triggers is very helpful. So you can help prepare for that, like when it happens, and you can create a plan for how to deal with it.
Okay.
And again, mental health support can really help provide that sort of guidance and helping you walk through identifying your triggers and also how to deal with them.
Okay, so like dealing, I'm not thinking in the sense of abuse, but I have a 7-year-old who will like I know his triggers, right? Like if he needs a nap, or if he needs to if he's not eaten, he's hangry. So in those terms, like you suggest that like, do they like deep breathing, or like what are some things that they can do?
Right, for sure. Like there are a lot of coping strategies.
Yes.
I think deep breathing is a
Yeah.
great one. One thing that I like to do is like when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just like to sit there and just feel my heartbeat just like on my
Okay.
wrist.
Yeah.
And that sort of grounding techniques. I
Yeah.
think that is a really great coping mechanism you can use.
Okay.
To
It's
bring
funny
you
you
back.
say this because I remember just a story here going back to my childhood in elementary school. I was one of the new girls, and I would get bullied because I was a new girl, and a lot of kids were just, I guess, didn't like me for whatever reason, right? New kid in the block, whatever. And there are still certain memories from my childhood that I remember, and they trigger me. So what I like to do is I'll just sit there and I'll doodle, just get a piece of paper and just start doodling, and that for some reason just calms me down.
Right. Yeah,
So-
like doodling, and I know a lot of people like journaling.
Yeah, I like doing
writing
that too.
about their day, their experiences,
Yeah.
and just kind of writing through the traumatic experience. I think
Yeah.
helps a lot of people.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
When you find yourself feeling triggered and in close proximity with your family, what are some things you can do to regulate your feelings?
Right. So for some people, it might be too difficult or uncomfortable to disclose triggers with your family, especially I feel like within our culture, like you're not supposed to really talk about things that are seen like too like quote unquote personal.
Right.
So self-care, I think, can really be an effective tool to help regulate your feelings and emotions and to become better equipped with managing stress.
Okay.
And so self-care, I know it's kind of a buzzword, but what it actually means is taking care of yourself so that you can be healthy, you can be well, you can do your job, you can help care for yourself and others, and you can do all the things you need to and want to accomplish in a day. And self-care can look different for everyone. Like for me, I like to just binge watch the Kardashians. But yeah, to count as self-care, the behavior should promote health and happiness for you. So self-care is not self-improvement. It's just doing what you need to do to be healthy.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and that also includes taking the time to acknowledge and express your feelings, like your anger, your sadness, frustration, when you feel overwhelmed. Those are all very normal responses to being around toxic or negative family members. And then again, when it comes to triggers, you can use self-care to kind of as a coping mechanism around family. So like 3 tips you can use. One, you can state your feelings as specifically as possible. So whenever you can just say, like, when you said X, it made me feel anxious and afraid because of my history. And then second, setting a boundary, you can say, it's hard for me to talk about X. And if it comes up in a conversation, I know I need to leave the room. And then third, you can also just ask for a warning. I know it's hard to avoid the topic of X. Could you let me know beforehand if it's going to come up? And so I think these acts of self-care can sometimes mean limiting time with negative family members or even stopping engagement with family members altogether. And as difficult as it is in South Asian cultures to distance yourself from family, sometimes your mental health has to come first.
Yeah. And that is so hard, I think, in our culture, honestly, because I think we have been, at least I'm talking about myself, I've been raised to, look after the family first. Like somehow we come last in our heads, at least. That's how we've seen our moms do it and stuff. So to have those boundaries and to clearly state that's just not there in my family, or they'll say, oh, you're too sensitive, just get over it, right? But I guess with the kids, it has to change somewhere. It has to start. So we need to start it like with our children. That's what,
because
I hope
kids
so.
mimic what we do.
Right.
So we need to take care of ourselves so they can mimic the same
Right.
thing when they're older and feeling overwhelmed. That no, it's okay for me to take that time off and to do something for myself.
Exactly. And then communicate our feelings.
Yes.
Because kids do feel it. Okay, like she's gone crazy today. They're like, okay, yeah.
I go back constantly, and I think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And the only way they're going to listen to me is if I yell, and then like this is a cycle,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's just continued, right?
Yeah.
And funny, a video that was going on, TikTok video a while ago, where there was these moms beating their kids with like a shoe or a and my kids were like, why are you guys so aggressive?
My 7-year-old will come up to me if I go crazy on them. She's like, you know, you can say this in a lower tone. You don't have to scream at me. Like, well, you didn't listen the last 20 times I said it.
Yes, and it's funny because they'll call their dad or something, and something's wrong with mom today. So it is funny, but I think we have to learn to communicate and express our feelings. Like, instead of like being mad, like, just try talking it out, right?
Yeah, or bottling it up inside.
Yeah, because it just bottles up and then it blows up. So yeah, that's a really good idea, especially this time of the year, because there's too much happening. So yeah.
But that's with your kids, but there's the other element of, talking to your elders,
right,
where the triggers are coming from, right, during the holidays, and there's a hierarchy, right? So some of these things, if I were to say, these are my feelings, or can you give me a warning?
You can't.
I can't even imagine telling my mom, can you give me a warning?
What warning? What are you talking about?
Exactly, right? So, but I think what really works is the first two things that you mentioned is expressing how, when you're in trigger, how that made you feel. Now, they might accept that boundary and they might not, but you need to, as long as you have the strength to say, this is my boundary, and what they do with that information at the end of the day is going to be on them.
Right.
But 9 out of 10 times that person receives it much better than you expected.
Yeah.
I don't agree with you. It makes me feel, my dad brings up death a lot, right? It's a trigger for me, right? He's like very dramatic, like, I'm going to die if you don't do this kind of thing. So one of the things I've learned to say is that, when you bring up death, it really stresses me out. Can we leave death out of this,
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
They get it.
They get it. Maybe they're trained or triggered that way, or that's just the language that they have. Everything, let me merge.
That's true. That is
over dramatic,
But it's a feeling that elicits a lot of emotions, right?
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I think like using those I statements, like I feel, or not kind of like blaming them, or like you said that and you made me feel that way.
Yes.
But kind of owning up to like, this is how I feel.
When you use those phrases.
That's a really good example.
Yeah.
Because we always think, like, even now that we're talking about it, if I had to talk to my elders, I would rather journal than talk to them.
Yeah.
I'm still not there yet, you know. But when you say it that way, like, it's such a simple statement, right? Like, just expressing that one sentence, and then hopefully, like you said, your parents took it. So,
because I think automatically we make up what their answer will be to what we say to them.
Right.
And so then it just kind of like pulls us back. Okay, you know what? Let me not say this, because then I don't know what their response will be.
Because I still am petrified of my dad. We were 3 girls, so we were raised in a very strict household. So even now, like, when we have conversation, my dad's in India, but when we speak, it's hi, hello, like, how are you, and that's
very
it.
Formal.
Very formal. So but all right. Many young people are spending time with their families over the holidays. In our community, what are some things they may be hiding about their identity when they visit home?
There's a lot of things, right? You could be hiding a relationship. You could be hiding sexual orientation. You could be even hiding passions. Like, I went to school, I'm in college. I know you think I'm here for medical school, but I've switched to elementary education or art, right? And having to be able to eventually tell them, or hiding that. So there's a lot of things that we hide. And so I don't know if they answer the question, but I know Pam and I talked about this on Friday. Spiritually, as a parent, I see my role as a guide. I don't own you. I don't control you. I'm not here to live my unfulfilled dreams through you. Right?
Yeah.
I am your guide. I'm going to give you the information you need. You take what you need to take it. At the same time, children also need to see, and we talked about this during hyper education, where we're coming from. Why are we coming from? What is the information we're bringing in, right? And why is this so important to us? And so that communication needs to be there, and understanding the role. it's just basically, and also give grace to your parents. If you do reveal your identity, whatever it might be, give them patience.
Yeah.
They might not accept it the first time. It might take several years.
Yeah.
It might be immediate. Maybe they already knew and you didn't know they knew,
Yeah.
or they were just waiting for you to come to them.
Yeah.
And it might be something, I have several family members who've come out as LGBTQ in the community. It took one of my cousins a year or two. It took another one. She's still not there yet, the mom, right?
Oh.
No,
Okay.
she's not there. I mean, she still loves her child,
Of course.
but she's struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing to understand is that, we can't force it on them. This is a lot happening, very quickly. And so give them time. They will come around. 9 out of 10 times they will come around.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true.
And there's also a lot of cultural differences sometimes between like the parents and older generations and the generations who were born here, like second generations. And
Yeah.
I think from that, like because of the cultural differences, there's just naturally going to be identity differences too. And like as you were saying, to give them that grace to understand like a lot of the terms like non-binary. I know my dad probably has no idea what that is. But yeah, giving them, again, like that grace to provide them the education, give them the resources that they need to slowly get there to become that kind of understanding parent.
And you would be surprised what our parents already know from their own life. I'll give you a couple of examples. And one just happened this weekend as we were talking about my niece that came out. And my mom was like, oh, well, my sister-in-law her niece was married to a man that he was gay, but he never told her, and eventually he left her. And I'm talking about 50, 60 years ago,
Oh,
right?
wow.
70, I'm like, why do these stories haven't come out, right?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
haven't you shared this? And then even earlier in the summer, there was some confusion about how something was interpreted, and then some sexual assault story came out, right? Like, oh, well, this happened in this house. I'm like, why do these triggers or these events have to happen for you guys to open up that you are familiar with these
Right.
cases? You've experienced them. You know somebody. You know.
Yeah.
So I feel like every time I see my parents or some event is happening with my kids or my nieces and nephews, more is being revealed. It'd be
Right.
nice if we were just having more open conversations because it would make us all feel more normal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's amazing to hear, right? Like, this is not something new. It has happened if you're saying 50, 60 years ago. So it was something that's there, but somehow now, like, we just can't talk about it. It's always so closed and it's like, shunned or shoved under the rug, right? So it's amazing that...
I feel like a lot of them still think that if they talk about these, then it's going to be like planted in their head and they're going to go that route.
Yes, because we're open to it, we're open to it. And so I give one example. It was the day after my wedding, and everyone was giving my cousin's son a hard time because he wasn't really good in school, and they were just really pounding on him, and I'm very protective over him. So I said something, I'm like, well, your mom wasn't a really good student, right? And everybody was like, how dare you say that? He doesn't need to know that. I'm like, she played hooky all the time, right? Like,
Why is it not okay?
Like, why are you beating down? Because he doesn't need to know that. You need to be encouraging him. I'm like, or you can make him feel a little bit more normal, right?
Yes.
And stop putting him in $2,000 tutoring classes thinking the problem is going to get better because you want to make up, once again, for what you lack. I'm not saying that we don't need to try or we don't need to make effort, but we can't be beating down on him. We need to try some other ways.
Yes.
And I will never forget that day. I'm like, it's the day after my wedding. Why are you yelling at me?
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and after that, we'll be back to this very interesting conversation. Back to Chai Time on 99.5 FM. We are in conversation with Pam Otal and Sandhya Asamnani about healthy family relationships during the holidays. So let's get to our next question. As a parent, what are some tips for helping your adult college-age children feel accepted and loved despite any parts of their identity that you may be uncomfortable with?
Okay, I see the question right here. It's back to being patient with your adults, right?
We have a caller that has a question for you guys.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I can figure it out.
I'm gonna have to get that. Hello? Hello?
Dick, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So, of course, this is a great topic, and I just, I have a question. So, of course, when you're talking about LGBTQ, and, those things weren't, out there, as much as it is now. And kids are even being, exposed to this, in school and, in other communities also. They talk about it, and they ask them to identify yourself. Why is it so important if a young kid who does not know about, the definition, why are we putting it out there, putting it in their head, what it is, and you have all the right. Maybe they don't have, that mentality, or maybe they don't even think about it, but now, since it's out there, they probably think, oh, I can be gay, or you know what I mean? Yeah. And also, every time I notice, there's always another letter is being added to it.
Thank you so much for calling. Yeah, I think, like you were saying, they might not know the words, right? But that doesn't mean that they might not have that feeling. I think you hear so many stories of people in the LGBTQ community when they were young, as young as 4 years old or 5 years old, feeling that they're different and noticing that they have feelings that are different than what they're told they're supposed to have. So I think whenever we do talk about the definitions, it sort of normalizes it and helps them feel oh, okay, this is what I am. Gives them that sense of belonging, and along with that, hopefully acceptance as well.
I'm a parent as well of a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, and it is, I understand where you're coming from and how you feel. I just want to start with that, because the question is for parents, when is too young? When is the right time? When is the right age? Are we introducing concepts that didn't exist? I'll give you a funny story about my own son. He came home one day and he's like, what does you're so gay mean? Everyone keeps on saying that at school. So he was in 5th grade. So I told him, I was honest with him. I told him what it meant, and I said, we can talk more about it as you get older. There's some concepts you don't even have attractions yet to anybody, so it might not make sense. And he goes, oh, we don't need to wait. I know I'm gay. And I was like, why? Why do you know? He goes, I can't stand girls, right? We'll revisit in a year, but don't, you're not. You may be, but it's too early to say, right? And so your interpretation definition is not necessarily correct. So, and as far as adding the letters, I just think it's because as we're becoming more aware and more educated about the community, we want to represent and be inclusive. And I am also learning, I read essays for college admissions, and one time I was reading an essay, and my friend's daughter revealed in the essay that she was queer. And I called her and I said, can you define this for me, please? Because when my definition of queer, I don't think is what today's definition is. So please educate Auntie, you know. So I think we have to be open. We have to be open to the letters. We have to be open to the definitions. And I was right. I was wrong about what my definition was versus what she was revealing in her essay. And I think that's really the most important thing as parents is that we're listening and we're open and we're honest with our kids. And it's okay to tell your kids, I don't know, let's wait a year or two on that, right? I mean, I know conversations, my son was asking me about sexual references in 4th or 5th grade, and then in 6th grade, the timing just felt right where we could have those conversations. So sometimes it's not timing.
I mean, it's good to know, as a parent, I mean, I myself feel like I need to be more educated when my kids come and ask me a question, but still, I just feel like it's going very fast, and I just felt like, okay, my son was not ready. Of course, my daughter is a little older. And then my son, and, he said, why everyone, and the funny thing is, so he came up to me and he told me why they have to talk about this LGBTQ, and now they always add now I and, A and all that. And he told me, Mom, God has created only, Adam and Eve, and the male and the female. So this never existed. So this is why he's only 9. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not. He's 12 now. I'm talking about a year ago when he talked, when he was 11. And I mean, I like the way he questioned me and the way he said it. And he's like, Mom, I don't think, this should be out there. But sometimes it's hard to, like, I do not know what to answer him at that point.
Right.
But, well, thank you. I mean,
You can tell him it's always been there. We just haven't talked about it and haven't been open to receiving it.
Right.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking my call, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day. All right.
Oh, so you'd asked the question about
As a parent, what are some tips for helping your college-age children feel accepted and loved despite of their differences, right? Identity.
I think just what we talked about is boundaries, and one thing Pam and I talked about on Friday is understanding that parents have boundaries too. As we're going through this and we're talking about making boundaries and setting boundaries, and I just learned this myself at 47 a few months ago. I'm very open about it. I have a therapist, and my therapist called me out and said, "You broke your dad's boundary." I was like, "What do you mean I broke my dad's boundaries?" He's like, "You just because you don't agree doesn't mean that wasn't a boundary. That was a boundary that you don't accept or agree with, but that's his boundary, and he's very clear." And so knowing that and understanding it, it's a two-way. It's two-way, and just being patient and hearing, hearing one another out, and giving time. Time is a lot,
Time, and I think, like you said, being open about it, right? Like, you can't be, like the conversation, you can't be closed-minded. You have to be open for those and accepting.
And I always say that my goal as a parent is I want my children to want to come home, not to feel like they have to come home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where they feel welcome no matter what.
Like, I don't want to be like, it's holidays, oh God, I gotta go home, right? Like, I want to go home, Mommy, I'm coming. I want it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's the goal that we want.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I would also say, I think, I'm not a parent, but sort of as a child, I see that a lot of parents have this tendency, like they need to be this perfect role model, like they can't show their children any flaws, like they always have to be like that person their children can aspire to.
Yeah.
But I know for me that was really hard to relate to. Like, what's coming to mind is sometimes I do get a lot of social anxiety, and going to family events, especially large family events, where I'll have to meet the aunties who ask me the questions I don't want to answer.
When are you getting married?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, number one question. And so, whenever I would talk to my parents about, I don't want to go here, they'd be like, oh, you have to go. But I think now that I'm older and we have developed more of a friendship, hearing my dad kind of talk about his social anxieties has helped me through my own social anxieties. So I think opening up and being vulnerable and allowing yourself to be a real person around your kids is also really a great path to, like, accepting your children and making them feel more welcomed.
Absolutely, yeah. Because generally we always have this where we keep that perfect, like we're perfect mothers and nothing can go wrong, or we're crying in the corner, not in front of them, right?
Yeah.
That, okay, I'm going through this. But absolutely, I think that will make them feel like
showing vulnerability is important. They need to know that you can have feelings. It's okay.
Yeah, and it's okay sometimes to break down, and then you pick up and you move up back, So, that's great. All right, so as a young person who has experienced harm from their family, what are some ways that they can see their family for the holidays but still take care of themselves?
So I feel like setting boundaries is the best way that you can do this. And Prentice Hemphill said, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and myself simultaneously. And I think people often view boundaries as walls and worry about disappointing those in their lives if they have set boundaries. But also at the same time, many people give more than they get back themselves, and they end up like burnt out and exhausted, and that's also not a good feeling either. So boundaries really are a critical component of that healthy sense of self and of sustaining yourself, like being able to give you that food you need to go on to the next day. And everyone has their own sort of set definitions of boundaries, but there are some guidelines that you can use whenever you're around family. Like one is to just remember to value yourself and your time. If you don't want to give someone your time, or if you feel like, okay, it's been 30 minutes, I need to leave, I have something else I can do,
Yeah.
give yourself that permission to just get up and leave.
Right.
And also just give yourself permission to do what's best for you. Like if you go to 7 family dinners a week, if you need one night off, take that night off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like know your triggers that you have and anticipate them so you can develop that coping strategy that we talked about before. And then also, yeah, again, communicating your needs and be clear about them. Like, I need this, or I am going to go, like this conversation is really hard. I'm going to go get some air outside, give myself some breathing room. And then another important thing, which I feel like is the hardest, is practicing saying no. I know for South Asians, and especially for South Asian women, that can feel really unnatural and
Yes.
uncomfortable to say no, especially to elders.
Right.
But it's sometimes you can't just say yes to everything. You're going to drain yourself, and you need to like have that set boundaries so you can protect yourself.
Right.
I mean, there's one element too. I mean, everything I agree with Pam is with the boundaries and making the boundaries and knowing what you're comfortable. It could be limiting your trip, to 2 or 3 days, or it doesn't have to be the whole week.
Yeah.
But also when you're married, there's another component. It's not always coming from the elders, right? It could be coming from your spouse because your spouse doesn't, thinks that they don't know how to say no, right? So sometimes there's different levels of boundaries that you have to make, not just with your parents or the elders. Then you have to make it within your own relationship and communicating that, and that takes some time too, because both partners have to be on the same page
Yeah.
of making boundaries, right?
Yes.
And so it's practice. It's a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and not feeling guilty. One thing when you said no. A lot of times people feel when they say no for that boundary, they feel guilty and they need to make it up with something else. Like, okay, well, I'm going to say no now, but I'm going to offer to do this. No is no. It doesn't need to be replaced because then it's not a boundary.
Right.
Yes.
If it's being replaced by
Very
guilt,
true.
it's not a boundary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well said. Very
Yeah.
true.
And I mean that is so true in our culture. Like if you say no, you're gonna be the outcast, I feel like, or you're the black sheep of the family. Like imagine I say no as a daughter-in-law. Dang, they're not gonna talk to me ever. They'll make it up with because they're sons or daughter. That's fine. That's a blood relation. With me, I'm just gonna be. So I think you always have that fear or that guilt, But then you also like we spoke about the self-care, right? Like you have to look after yourself and your needs at some point instead of getting burnt out.
But I think that's where your strong partnership would come
With your
into
Yeah.
place with your husband.
Right.
You're not the one saying no. He's going to want to be the one who's going to,
Yes.
because he has to protect you too and your
Yeah.
reputation and your image and your place in the family
Right.
too. So it has to not. It can't. Yes, because
Let
if
it
it's
come.
coming from me or you, then it's so much different
Then
than
it's
if your
coming.
partner says no. We are
Yeah.
not able to do this,
Right.
or no, she's not going to be able to do this. Sorry,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's where that strong partnership
Ship comes in.
Yes.
Yeah,
into place.
absolutely. So the other one is elder abuse by a child is also prevalent in our society. What are some examples of abuse of parents, and what are some red flags that elders should look out for?
Right. So elder abuse in South Asian households can often be overlooked due to that stereotype in South Asian cultures that we all respect our elders. And so elderly South Asians are also more likely not to speak English, and many still carry trauma from abuse they've experienced earlier in life. So these create additional barriers and hurdles for these victims of elder abuse for accessing support. And there are several red flags that you can sort of look out for. Like number one would be visual injuries, like if you see bruising or broken bones, that's obviously a big immediate red flag that should be addressed. And then also things that can be a little bit more subtle, like if a medication is overdosed or underdosed. If you see any unintended or untreated health problems, like if they're, for example, bedbound and you notice an odor and you feel like, okay, it doesn't seem like they're being changed regularly, that is definitely a signal or red flag that you should ask them about this, like when were you last changed? Why weren't you changed more recently? And also sort of personality changes, if they seem more withdrawn, if they seem non-responsive or non-communicative, like any sort of those personality changes are a red flag. And also if it seems like they're apologizing excessively, like if they just drop something like no big deal, and then but if they just are, oh, I'm sorry, and they just like that sort of reflex, that's also something where you can notice that something is wrong. And also the financial side of things, sudden changes in banking habits, or if a lot of their money gets transferred to someone else, or if there's changes in the will, those are also things that you should look out for, because that's unfortunately a very common abuse of elders, is financial abuse.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, if any elder discloses abuse, it's important to believe them and take them seriously. And if you feel like they're in immediate danger, obviously call law enforcement, call 911, help them get to a good shelter. And then at the same time, you can also call DIA, and the client advocates can provide them with the support and resources that they need.
Okay, that's good to know, and that's so hard to hear. Like that like some parents have to go through that. So yes, I'm glad you all are there to provide the support. So I think we answered the next question. Does DIA provide services for people experiencing elder abuse?
Yeah, for sure we do. And it's, again, elder abuse of any kind. Like if it's emotional, psychological, financial, or physical abuse, we do provide supports for all of the victims. And those supports include like mental health, like therapy, counseling, and also a big component that we do is offer financial support. So that could be direct cash assistance, housing assistance, and also legal assistance. So if it is something with a will and other kind of family law-related issues, or protective orders, or police reports, we can also provide assistance in that regard.
Okay, that's awesome. As an adult, what are some ways you can ensure you are not crossing boundaries with aging parents and that you are not inadvertently taking advantage of them? We were just talking about that, right?
Just realizing that they have boundaries, I guess a lot of times it's like, are you taking advantage of your parents with childcare?
Yeah.
Right? I know that my mom is she's number 3 of 9, my dad's number 3 of 7, and so they had a lot of responsibilities from a very, very young age. They were parents before they were even adults, and then they had their own kids, and then first to come to this country. And my parents, they are loving, they love all my kids, but they made it very clear to my sister and I, we are not raising your kids, and nor did we want them to raise our kids. We wanted them to just be grandparents. And I think realizing that, and we do live a crazy life, most of us. Sorry, we're overscheduled. We were never in these many activities growing up, and then
very true.
To realize that they cannot keep up with this pace, and it's not even fair enough to.
And it's not fair. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean that's. I know there's probably other situations in other cases, but that would probably be the one. I see probably more often than not.
Okay, that's good to know. As parents age, marriages can change. What are some signs of spousal abuse that adult children can look out for?
Right, so many times perpetrators and victims try to hide the abuse from children, but there's so many warning signs that you can still look out for, and so many red flags that you can see. And so some include visible injuries, like if you see bruising on the arm, or if it's in the summer and they're wearing a heavy, bulky turtleneck sweater, that's also a red flag. And then if the abused parent is afraid to say no to the perpetrator, like if you're like, oh, why don't you ask them this? I'm like, no, I can never ask them to do this. Like that sort of like gauging that fear, that's also definitely something that you should look out for. And also if they seem isolated, like if they're not allowed to talk to anyone, if they're not allowed to go anywhere, they can't drive themselves anywhere, that sort of isolation is also a very common abuse tactic that you can look out for. And then also something that I feel like it's kind of common, but we don't really recognize it as abuse, is if the perpetrator likes to like embarrass or make fun of or like name call the abused partner in front of friends or family or in public. That's also a red flag. Like just thinking about like, okay, if they're comfortable doing this when other people are around, what are they saying to them behind closed doors?
Right.
And again, like sort of the financial aspect, if they keep them from working or if they don't let them access money, like if they have to ask permission for money or if they even have like an allowance that like they can't go over that or they can't get the things that they want, that's also a big red flag. And I think also lastly, if they just seem like they act differently around that person, if they seem more withdrawn or quiet, and then when their perpetrator leaves, they're more open and friendly and calm.
You can see that personality change.
That difference.
Okay. What is the best way to bring up your concerns, and what are some tips to follow up even when you do not live in the same area?
Right, so you can follow like the 3 R's that we have: recognize, respond, and refer. So that would be listening and empathizing what they're saying, but also maintaining confidentiality. Like they might disclose something, you want to immediately go get help, but you have to meet them where they are. You can't just disclose, like force them to do something they're not ready for yet.
Okay.
And at the same time, don't judge or advise them. Like reach out to professionals. Like at Daya, like we are educated on the issue, and we can provide them with guided safety plans and other resources that can protect them and help them safely leave a relationship.
Okay.
And it's also important that you never give them the impression that you don't believe them. Even if you know the perpetrator is your father and the victim is your mother. You always want them to feel heard.
Yeah.
And another thing that you can do is just to be available to take their call at any time. And now, like, there is more electronic surveillance that a lot of perpetrators use, like tracking calls and emails and forcing them to share social media passwords. So just keep in mind what it is that you're putting in your emails or in any sort of written communication that's electronic. And kind of following up to that, it's also good to schedule phone calls sometimes. Like, okay, so if it's the father who's abusing the mother, like scheduling a phone call, like, okay, mom, let's talk 3 to 5 when we know dad's at work.
Right.
So that could be a safe time for y'all to talk freely.
Okay, that's some great information that you have shared with us, and unfortunately we are right on time, 12. So I really appreciate y'all coming here and sharing this great information. Do you want to share your events, what are coming up, and then how can the listeners get in touch with Daya?
Right. So next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m., we're going to have a lunch and learn on this topic, on building healthy family relationships. And it will be sort of a deeper dive so you can learn more about the topic and educate yourself on more and how this happens in the South Asian community and more signs that you can look out for. And information about that will be on our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, across social media, where you can just follow us at Daya Houston.
Okay.
And if you yourself or if anyone you know is experiencing abuse, you can contact our confidential helpline at 713-981-7645.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
With the caller that called in, and when I used the phrase that my son was referring to, it's okay. I also want to make it very important. I did teach my son that that's a derogatory comment and we don't use that. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer, not just explaining what it was, but it's really important that we don't let those kind of that language continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much for your time and sharing these personal stories. I think it's so important, right? Because it's like if it's happening with you and your son, I mean, and I have a son too, he's just 6th grader now, but just the ways to talk to them, because sometimes you shy away from these topics because that's the way, like, you don't know any other way. But because we have these conversations now, we've given listeners, different ways that they can communicate and get, like, Daya is a great resource for them to reach out to.
And we should be grateful that our kids are coming to us.
Yes, absolutely.
To talk to us about it.
Very important.
Thank you so much, and thank you, listeners, for your time, and we will see you next time, same place. Bye-bye.